And now we're going to be moving on to Boros with the Boros Guild Leader to start off with. Aurelia, Exemplar of Justice. Aurelia, Exemplar of Justice is a 4-mana, 2/5 legendary angel with flying and mentor. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, choose up to one target creature you control. Until end of turn, that creature gets +2/+0, gains trample if it's red, gains vigilance if it's white. So this is going to be one of the more prominent cards in the set. It's certainly one of the more powerful cards in the set, at least as far as like the fair cards go, certainly. The fact that it both has 5 toughness, as we've talked about earlier, there's a bunch of removal spells that care about 4 toughness. 5 is a bit of a flashpoint that survives more things than normally would. And the fact that it impacts the board immediately. Well, you can play Aurelia, go to combat, Aurelia triggers, you pump one of the things in play. If it's a thing that has Mentor, it can pump another thing you have in play, and you're doing it. So her ability to immediately impact the board in conjunction with her resilience, and then the fact that if she stays in play, she's going to start mentoring stuff. Her base power is low enough where you also have the option of using her trigger on another mentor creature and have that creature mentor Aurelia, making Aurelia even bigger for future turns, making her more resilient. You have a bunch of options in how you want to play that. If you decide to give her vigilance so you can still maintain the 5 toughness blocker on the back end, there's a huge amount of flexibility in the ways in which you can play with Aurelia, and all of them are really good. So this is certainly like one of the most powerful cards in the set. It's going to appear in Boros aggro, in more mid-range decks, in Naya decks. You like are going to find yourself probably wanting to splash whatever the off color is for Aurelia in 3-color decks, be it like Naya or Jeskai or what have you. It's just an incredibly powerful card. It also synergizes exceptionally well with Militia Bugler, along with some other cards we'll get to and have already talked about. The fact that it is a 4-drop with 2 toughness, it is very powerful, means you can play Militia Bugler, increasing your odds of finding Aurelia to play on turn 4, play Aurelia on turn 4, pump your Militia Bugler, give it 4 power. If it trades us something, whatever, it replaces itself, who cares? It's just like a very good value sequence if you're okay playing on a little bit of the slower end of what Boros has to offer. So I'm going to be personally playing a bunch of Aurelia. A bunch of other people are going to be playing a bunch of Aurelia. It's one of the best cards in the set by a lot. Moving on to Boros Challenger, a little bit more of a modest card, but certainly still very playable. It is red-white, 2/3, human soldier with mentor, and you can pay 4 mana to give it +1/+1 until end of turn. This is just like a rock-solid 2-drop. It's not exceptional, but as we've seen, a lot of the other 2-drops have 2 toughness or 2 power, so Boros Challenger can actually brick wall some stuff. The fact that it is a 2-drop with mentor means it can pump like the 1-drop goblin we saw before. Just if you want like a 2-drop, this is likely going to be one of the better ones that Boros in particular has access to. It also it has the ability to sink mana into it if it's the only thing you have going on, making it bigger, making it able to mentor more things. So I do think this is a solid 2-drop. It will likely see a fair amount of play, if for no other reason than there aren't many alternatives, but it's actually pretty solid by itself. A bit more of an interesting card, Chance for Glory. It is a colorless red-white instant. Creatures you control gain indestructible. Take an extra turn after this one. At the beginning of that turn's end step, you lose the game. So this card is actually pretty interesting, and I think quite a bit better than the one from Amonkhet that's name I'm forgetting. I believe it was also like something of glory that ended the turn instantly. This one is a little bit better because the fact that it's instant, take an extra turn after this one, means that when you use it on your opponent's turn, you kind of double stack the turns. So the text on this says, at the beginning of that turn's end step, meaning the extra turn, you lose the game. So what you can do, this is like a pretty simple example. No one's going to walk into this, but just for an example, you have some stuff in play in 3-mana open. Your opponent uses a sweeper. You Chance of Glory. All your stuff gets indestructible, survives. You go to your next turn. That's your normal turn you would have had anyway. You attack, do a bunch of damage, get your extra turn, attack again, and hopefully it is lethal because on that end step you lose the game. but that's a lot of window you have to kill them from that point. That is certainly a lot more applicable than the other versions we've seen of cards like this. It's still pretty situational. Obviously, you can't really draw this in multiples. Casting the second one doesn't do a heck of a whole lot. So it might be worth just taking a flyer on this and throwing it like as a one-of in your Boros decks, because there are spots where you can just savage your opponent with it. But it is a very narrow card. But it is a very powerful card in those narrow situations where it is good. So it's something that you might just throw in your deck just because, but not really something you could play multiple copies of, in my opinion. Mainly because the second copy doesn't do anything. Literal nothing. Deafening Clarion. Deafening Clarion is a 3-mana sorcery. Choose one or both. Deafening Clarion deals 3 damage to each creature. Creatures you control gain lifelink until end of turn. So Deafening Clarion is a bit weird for a Boros card, as it is a card that's pretty good against the general things you're going to be doing in Boros, which is a bit weird. But I do think this card is actually quite powerful in a Naya midrange deck, or any slower midrange deck that plays creatures with more than 4 toughness and red-white. Generally, it's going to be Naya, but there may be other color combinations where that is applicable, because those decks are trying to bridge into the mid and late game. This card helps them do that, preventing them from getting run over. And it actually plays very well when you have your own creatures in play, primarily creatures with 4 or more toughness, so they survive. But say, for example, your opponent has some small creatures, you have some 4/4 or whatever, or an Aurelia, like you have an Aurelia, and you Deafening Clarion, kill their stuff, give Aurelia lifelink, attack, you are fully stabilized. The game is over. That's a very powerful thing to have happen. So this is a card that I do think will show up. It has a spot in that deck. As we talked about before, whether or not decks like that are good, separate question. But there are archetypes that have existed in the past where a card like this would have been very powerful in. We'll see if any like Naya midrange or Jeskai midrange decks like that show up where this card can be truly exceptional. Even if you're not utilizing the lifelink mode, Jeskai Control would probably be perfectly content to just play this as a bad Slagstorm. Like, that's honestly totally fine, and something that I wouldn't be surprised to see either. So this will be the applicable, like, cheap sweeper for decks that are interested in that. It's actually pretty cool that normally this is double red. Like Sweltering Suns, Anger of the Gods, Slagstorm, all of that's double red. This one's red-white, which is actually easier to cast than double red. So it's easier on the mana of a Jeskai Control deck, for example, because they actually want to run disallows and stuff at double blue, and this makes it easier for them to do that while actually getting both effects, which is something that was hard to do previously. Garrison Sergeant, it's a bit more of a limited card, 5 mana 3/3. Garrison Sergeant has double strike as long as you control a gate. If you have a gate, this card's good and limited. That's about it. Hammer Dropper. This card has very luxurious hair. It does not have very luxurious stats. It is a 4 mana 5/2 Mentor. This is like the baseline how Mentor works card. It has high power, so it can mentor a bunch of things. Haha, that's the joke. But yeah, it's just a limited card. Justice Strike. This one's actually interesting. Justice Strike is red-white instant. Target creature deals damage to itself equal to its power. So this card kills any creature whose power is equal to or greater than its toughness. It sounds simple, but that's what it is. So this card's power level is obviously going to be determined by how many of those creatures are commonly played. For example, this cannot kill Aurelia, so that's a strike against it. But it can kill, like, Nicol Bolas, all of the dragons, really. The card I can see underneath this, Champion of Autumn or Knight of Autumn. There is a fair number of things this kills. It's something you're going to have to weigh when you want to put this in your deck. What cards do you care about? Does this card kill those cards? It's very efficient at doing that when it's lining up correctly. It's just a question of what does your deck want to remove, and does this line up well against them? There are other removal spells you could use in place of this, but I actually think this is going to be one of the better ones for, like, Jeskai Control or even Boros. This is just, like, generally a pretty strong removal spell. About on par with Cast Down. They have, like, similar ranges of what they kill. So this is certainly a card that will show up a fair amount, at least as much as Cast Down has, certainly. Depending, even potentially more than that, depending upon how the format shakes out, what's commonly played, etc. Legion Guild Mage. This is the Boros Guild Mage. All the Guild Mages are pretty underpowered for constructed. They're all like limited signpost cards. This one in particular, 2 mana, can pay 6 and tap it to deal 3 damage, or pay 3 and tap it to tap another creature. Pretty underwhelming, even in limited. It's very expensive for those effects. It does give you reach, which is a desirable effect, and inevitability to some extent. But either way, a limited card, not something we are personally concerned about. Skyknight Legionnaire. Skyknight Legionnaire is a card that actually saw constructed play last time it was legal in Standard. So I think this time around we have better options with a card I believe we'll be getting to in a second, and the Goblin Rabblemaster type card. But this is not completely outside the range of constructed playability. It did see play before. It's just having evasion and haste on a 3-drop. It's a little bit small, but those things are desirable if you're very low to the ground. So it may pop up, but I do think we will have some better options. Tajik, the Legion's Edge. This card is quite strong. It is a 3-mana 3/2 with haste and mentor. Also, prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to other creatures you control, and you can pay red and a white to give Tajik Legion's Edge first strike until end of turn. So this is our on-crop crasher type thing for this format, and I actually like it, not necessarily better than on-crop crasher, but the way it synergizes with the other things going on in the set with Mentor is very good. Generally, haste plus Mentor is going to be very strong. There's actually a card we will preview exactly after this one that is a 2-drop that is very good to curve into Tajik. Gives you the ability to immediately mentor your 2-drops, which is reasonably big aim, in addition to just like attacking himself. He also protects your other creatures from damage. So say, for example, you have a 2-drop already in play, you play Tajik. While Tajik is on the stack, they have to choose whether or not they're going to let Tajik attack, mentor your thing, and like kill Tajik, or kill the thing before Tajik comes into play, let Tajik live, because once it comes into play, they can't kill it. So it does help protect your other creatures, both in the fact that Tajik is something they are gonna need to kill, and the fact that they don't kill it, that you can't kill their other stuff. You have to go through Tajik first, at least for damage-based removal. So this is a very, very, very strong 3-drop. It lines up very well with what Boros is trying to do, and it's going to probably kill a bunch of people, including myself. Especially when you play it right after Swiftblade Vindicator. Swiftblade Vindicator is a 2-mana, red and white, 1/1 with double strike, vigilance, and trample. This card may look innocuous. It is small. It is a 1/1 for 2 mana. That may not seem very powerful. But in a set where you have a lot of very low-cost ways to pump this, i.e. through Mentor, on cards that immediately do it, like Tajik, the fact that it has double strike and trample means this card scales incredibly well. If you just like play this on 2 and then play Tajik and Mentor this, you're attacking for 7 damage on turn 3. And you still have things they need to deal with. Like, they are like kind of dead next turn. Like, they're in trouble. If you follow that up with Aurelia, they are like dead. Because you just Aurelia on this and then Mentor it again. I actually can't do it in that order, but they're still taking 1,000. So the upside on this card is very high, and the floor is not particularly low. It still can trade with 2 toughness things with no other help, and there is a lot of things that help it. So this is like getting double strike and trample on the same card and just like vigilance for free. Like, this card doesn't need vigilance, but getting double strike and trample on a card like just inherently is really strong. Like we've had to invest multiple cards to do that. Like Temur Battle Rage was a really bad card that we had to play to get that effect because it's so good to put both of those keywords on a card. Now just the creature just has it just by default. So Swiftblade Vindicator is pretty strong. It's going to be a premier 2-drop in Boros, mainly because of how low cost it is to make this bigger through Mentor. If you had to rely upon auras and stuff to make this a threat, it would be much worse because you'd have to continually expose yourself to 2-for-1s. That is not the case when it's going to be surrounded by Mentor creatures. Another limited card, Swath Cutter Giant, 6 mana 5/5 Vigilance. Whenever Swath Cutter Giant attacks, it deals 1 damage to each creature defending player controls. Seems reasonably powerful in limited, but certainly not what we're looking for in constructed. True Fire Champion. This is part of a cycle of double requirement cards for all of the guilds. They're all borderline constructed playable. This one, I think, makes the cut depending upon how slow the Boros decks end up being, but it is red, white, 4/3, Mentor. Whenever True Fire Champion is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to target player. This is a callback to Boros Reckoner, a card that was incredibly powerful during its standard legality. This card is quite a bit worse than Boros Reckoner for a couple of reasons. It's more expensive, it has a worse body for its cost. Boros Reckoner could hit creatures. Boros Reckoner, I guess, was circumstantially easier to cast, depending. But this card, I still think, is reasonable. The problem is that it's directly competing with Aurelia, and it's unclear how many 4-drops ostensibly aggressive Boros deck would want. Usually like 4-ish, and that's Aurelia, and there's no more room. So I'm not sure that this card's going to have a spot, not because it's not necessarily good enough, but because the kind of decks it would go in only want so many 4-drops, and there are better 4-drops. The other thing you could do with this card, outside of playing it in a fair capacity, is put it into play, do something for the next, 4 turns, and then Star of Extinction, and your opponent takes 20. So that's like a meme you could do. There was actually a constructed playable version of that with Boros Reckoner and Blasphemous Act. That was mainly because Blasphemous Act had a clause where it cost much less if there were a bunch of creatures in play, so it was actually a remotely castable card. The same cannot be said of Star of Extinction, but if you want to go that route, you certainly can. It does kill your opponent. So, in a fair capacity, I think this card is borderline, but given the competition, it probably won't show up. And it does unlock the ability to do some fairly comical meme stuff, if that's the kind of thing you're interested in. Fresh-Faced Recruit is a 2-mana 2/1. As long as it is your turn, Fresh-Faced Recruit has First Strike. Hey, it has Quick Draw! They put Quick Draw in Magic. This is a limited card. It's a good limited card, but it's a limited card. Now we get to the Boros Split card. I apologize for the verticality of the preview. I can't do a heck of a whole lot about that. So this is not like the Aftermath Amonkhet Split cards that some of you may be mainly familiar with if you started playing recently. You can cast either side of this from your hand. So the first side is Integrity. Integrity is a hybrid red-white instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. And the other side is Intervention. Colorless white-red. Intervention deals 3 damage to any target, and you gain 3 life. I actually think Integrity and Intervention is a reasonably powerful card for the Boros archetype, at least a solid role player. You just saw Swiftblade Vindicator, and whenever you're playing that card in your deck, a card like Integrity certainly gets quite a bit better due to the ceiling that it has. You can just do a bunch of damage to your opponent. And even outside of that, Integrity is generally going to be big enough to change the combat math in a favorable way. We saw Blossoming Defense used in this capacity in the more creature-based matchups. Obviously, Integrity's quite a bit worse than Blossoming Defense because it's not as give hexproof, but there are enough cases where Blossoming Defense was just used as a bad giant growth, and that actually did alter combat math in a favorable way. And this card has the upside of having another mode in Intervention if you can't leverage the side of Integrity. The upside of these split cards is that if one mode is a bit too situational, or both modes are a bit too situational, by their powers combined, you can usually find a window to leverage one or the other, and that flexibility is generally worth quite a bit. So if you haven't found a window to leverage integrity in the early stages of the game, you just have intervention for some reach or removal moving into the mid and late game. So I personally think integrity intervention probably carves out a few slots in the at least the Swiftblade Vindicator iterations of Boros. Probably if you're slower than that, there's probably going to be better options, but there are applications for this card when you are playing Swiftblade Vindicator. And the other Boros split card, Response and Resurgence. Response is a 2 hybrid mana, red-white. Response deals 5 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. And Resurgence is a 5 mana sorcery. Creatures you control gain First Strike and Vigilance until end of turn. After this main phase, there is an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase. So this is actually a very powerful card. Another card that could be used in either a more aggressively slanted Boros deck or a bit of a slower mid-range Boros deck / Naya deck, because both of the modes are very good. Response is just a very solid removal spell. It would be one of the reasons why maybe the Flashpoint at 4 doesn't matter. Like, if this card sees more play than Lava Coil, then the Flashpoint becomes 5 instead of 4. But in general, Response is going to be killing pretty much whatever you want it to be killing. If you're playing a slower deck, you can just kill creatures when they attack, which is kind of the only time you care about them. And if you're playing a more aggressive Boros deck, you can just attack with your 3 dudes into their blocker. They block a thing, you response it, and it dies. You get your damage through, you save your dude. And especially if you have a Swiftblade Vindicator with Double Strike and Trample, if they try and block that, you can response. Even if the 5 damage doesn't kill it, it's probably going to die to the first strike damage of the Vindicator and then trample over, and your opponent's getting wrecked. So there's a lot of ways to leverage response in a Boros shell. And the awesome part about this card that I love is the fact that response is such a ubiquitous good card that you would just snap play 4 of it, and then you just free roll, get the ability to have Resurgence in your deck. Resurgence is a very powerful effect, but it's an effect that is incredibly situational and something that you normally could not justify deck slots on. Now you don't have to, because it's just attached to this good removal spell. So you just have response in your deck, and in the like 10 to 20% of cases where Resurgence is good, you just get to cast it and win the game. So this card is like exactly how I love to see split cards designed, where you have one side that is just a very solid card that you would play by itself if it didn't have another side, and then the other side being a really cool effect that normally doesn't see play because of how situational it is, but now gets to see play because it's attached to a card that you would play anyway. So Response and Resurgence is a card that I definitely expect to see a lot of play, because you would just be in the business of playing Response, and then you're just free-rolling the effect of Resurgence that can just easily win the game. So that's incredibly high upside.